Shabbat Shalom. Thanks, Sylvie. It's nice to have you all here. I'm going to begin with just a little open honesty. It's been a hard little while to think about what to say to everybody in this room. The world is not an easy place for any of us. And I think for those of you who've been here often, you know that my sort of go-to, I believe the Chazan called it the Ethan special, is, everybody listen to each other, everybody get along, right? It's been basically that sermon in various different modes for, I don't know, when did I get here? 3.5 years ago? That's what we talk about. And that is what I believe. And it is what I believe the Torah asks of us. But I worry that messages of kindness and understanding and hearing the other and seeing the humanity in the other can sometimes feel like a little bit of relativism. And there's nothing right or wrong, it's just hearing the other. And I myself am having a very hard time looking at the world and remembering that I want to see people as human and that I need to understand why people do what people do and that there are no monsters in this world, just humans. And I want to remember that even as I see things in the world that seem monstrous to me and are so hard to watch. And there is a dichotomy in the parsha we read this morning that has kind of helped me think about this, and I want to share it with you. Because there are two sets of villains in the story that we read this morning, in the story of the Exodus. The first villain that we see his vanquishment of is Pharaoh and Egypt, and the enslavement of our people and getting out and the miracles and everything we've been reading for the last few weeks. That is villain number one. And villain number two is Amalek, Andrew spoke about. So let's talk for a moment about these two kinds of evils that we see in the parsha. So Pharaoh is, I think, a stand-in for systems of oppression. Pharaoh represents a government. Pharaoh represents an entire people. The oppression that happens to the Israelites when they're enslaved in Egypt is one of an entire nation over another nation. And it is this systemic oppression. The individuals themselves actually can be seen even as sympathetic. Even Pharaoh, right, is sort of inherited a system that he didn't create, and he knew not Joseph, and he's just trying to do his best to manage what's going on, and God keeps hardening his heart, and you can see Pharaoh even as a bit of a sympathetic character. And this culminates with the Midrash that we all know and love. It's quite famous, which means I've heard it twice before, but it is that as the Israelites are singing, right, God says, "How could you sing while my creations are drowning?" Right? The individual Egyptians are given this measure of humanity, of compassion by God, even if the system that they were a part of was wholly uncompassionate and evil, and it must be overthrown. Right? And we as Jews today, right, we have to continue to be wary of systemic oppression. And our people have a long history of fighting such systems and advocating for justice for ourselves and for others. It is a muscle group that we unfortunately have to keep strong and warmed up today. The second villain in our parsha is Amalek. Now the people of Amalek, as we read, they attack Israel at the end of our parsha, but they become the archetypes for evil in the world. And the Torah itself is somewhat unclear as to why Amalek becomes the most evil of the evil. Some scholars suggest that it is because Amalek attacks without reason, We're not told why Amalek attacks the Israelites, just that they do. Perhaps just they wanted to do violence. Other famous Torah scholars, including our own Jeff Tigay, write that it was the way that Amalek attacked. Amalek went after the weak and the defenseless of the Israelites. It was the cruelty of Amalek that earns them the place as most reviled of the Jewish people. Amalek comes to represent not a systemic oppression, but interpersonal acts of cruelty and violence. And later rabbis take Amalek even a step further, and they say that Amalek actually represents everyone's doubt or cynicism. The Baal Shem Tov, founder of the Hasidic movement, he says that Amalek is not cruelty, but the doubt about the nature of God in the world. One of his later disciples enumerates this better and says, well, the numerical value of the word Amalek is the same as the word safek, doubt. He says, all things holy are certain and absolute, which is quite a statement. But Amalek is doubt. Baseless, irrational doubt that cools the fervor of righteousness with nothing more than a cynical shrug. And these two things, this cruelty and this doubt, are related, because I think that the cruelty we see in our world comes from a place of nihilism and cynicism. When those things set in, when we think that nothing matters, that's when we treat people as less than human. Now, the Torah tells us that both of these villains don't go away, right? The Pharaoh, remember, we read every year in the Haggadah that in each generation there arises a Pharaoh, right? Everywhere we have to go, we look for these systems of oppression. But the Torah itself tells us that God will be at war with Amalek throughout the generations, midor vador. In every generation, God and God's people, that's us, are fighting against Amalek and Amalek's descendants. The cruelty that we see every day in our world, the cruelty of Amalek in large and in small ways. And it is this dichotomy that is the best I can come up with for my anger, even as I know that I should understand others. Humans, even those engaged in systems of injustice, all humans deserve understanding. They deserve to be seen in their humanity. But actions that deny the humanity of others, that is the way of Amalek, and that is what the Torah says must be erased. Now, I know that I am being slightly less subtle than I usually am, but I don't want to be misunderstood. We can and should disagree about the best way to make a thriving society. We can disagree about taxes and how the government spends, about who deserves what, and even about what immigration into our society looks like. We should disagree about these important things, and we should approach each other with love and understanding and the knowledge that just because I think one thing and you think another, I don't hold you in any less regard. I hope that we have all known each other long enough for you to know that I mean this with all of my heart. But Amalek is not these debates. Amalek is, in the words of the Eitz Chaim commentary, this Torah's symbol of pure malice, attacking without cause. Some people commit crimes for profit or revenge, but Amalek acts that way for the sheer joy of hurting people. What we are talking about is not politics or policy. It is something deeper that has always been lurking in the hearts of even good people. It is something dark, born of cynicism and hate, and it is what the religious and the moral is meant to oppose. It's the very reason why we have been given the Torah. We see it in the Torah, we see it in our world today, we see it almost everywhere we look. We see it in the anti-Semitism that happens towards Jews just because they're Jews. We see it in the vitriol and the hatred that people speak about our people when we ourselves have done nothing. We see it in the stripping away of protections of people's health, protections of the environment out of avarice or malice. And we see it in the actions of those who are meant to protect us. Arresting people and not letting them get a coat, and then leaving them in the cold out of a detention center to walk home. Taking people without shoes or phones in 5-degree weather, and then just dropping them out of a car so that they can walk home when their citizenship has been proved. Using children as bait, to say nothing of murder. These are acts of Amalek. They are the acts that we are warned about in the Torah, and they are what we are told we must oppose in every generation. It is not our obligation to agree about the world. It is our obligation to agree that no one deserves to be treated this way, and that such actions have to be stopped. So too, the cynicism and the doubt that lets this go on. The idea that there is nothing we can do, so why bother? The idea that it's just more trouble to talk about it. Don't get people angry. Don't say anything. That too is a way of Amalek. And that too needs to be stopped. So, how do we do it? How do we fight against these villains that we see in our Torah, that we are warned will be in every generation, and that we see in our world today? Now, fighting Pharaoh is what we talked about a couple of weeks ago. The answer there is the Torah. We have an oppressive system, and the Torah is meant to be the laws that care, the laws that help, the laws that fight for the oppressed. And we, as the Jewish people, in whatever country we are in, we must fight for laws. We must work within laws. And after our services today, we're going to hear from Mark Aronchik, who is valiantly doing exactly that and trying to protect the Jews of the Penn community within and for the law. Now, fighting Amalek is a different story. The mitzvah to blot out Amalek has been, unfortunately, used in the past to justify violence, because the Torah tells us to get rid of it. But people who see it that way, the Baruch Goldsteins of the world, did not understand the Torah. The parsha that we read tells Moses to gather troops, yes, to fight Amalek, but the battle is not won or lost by soldiers. Moses goes up onto the hill where he can see the fight and where he can be seen by those who are fighting, and he raises his hands. And we're told in the Torah that as long as his hands were raised, the Israelites prevailed. When his hands went down, Amalek started winning. And this magic continues until Moses gets so tired that he's drooping his hands, and so Aaron and Hur have to help hold them up, but it still works. Even when someone else is holding up Moses' hands, the Amalek loses and the Israelites win. Our commentaries note this, that the reason for this scene with Moshe's hands is to show us that it is precisely not through military strength or of arms that we defeat the cruelty of Amalek. We cannot fight hate with hate. We cannot fight violence with violence. It only perpetuates things. The Chafetz Chaim notes the grammar of what Amalek does and what Moshe does is yarim, he will hold up, instead of harim, he is holding up. So it's used in the future tense, says the Chafetz Chaim, because in every generation, so too Moses is holding up his hands. That is to say, the Torah is being held up. And when it is strengthened, Israel wins. When the Torah is strengthened, the forces of light and goodness win out over cynicism and hate. And when Moses' hands start to droop, when our Torah starts to lag, when the people who are trying to fight for the good and right become weary, then like Aaron and Hur, they need to be supported. I have many friends who live in Minneapolis, and two of whom are engaged in the public school system there. One is an administrator in an elementary school that is right in sort of the downtown neighborhood that has been on the news so much. And she told me that over half of the students are on virtual school. They're afraid to leave their houses. They're citizens. They're afraid to leave their houses because of what's going to happen. And so they're in like COVID protocol right now. They have 2 tracks, virtual school and in-person school. And the other thing that's going on is people are afraid to go to the grocery store. And so she and her fellow teachers have been bringing in food and letting kids take it out with them as they go so that families can be fed and not have to risk going out and facing what's going to happen there. She needs help. The people in Minnesota need our help. There is Amalek in the world, and the way that we stop it is by raising our hands, by calling it out, by standing up against it and supporting one another when we tire of the task. We do not hate people. We give humans understanding, but we fight the cruelty, we fight the doubt, and we fight the cynicism. We can do something. We can stand up to hatred. That is why we are here. It is what our people have been doing ever since Egypt. It is a battle in every generation. It is a battle for our generation. And the time has come for us to stand, to raise our hands, and to fight for Torah, to fight for goodness, and to fight for all of us against the forces of Amalek. Shabbat Shalom.